I came across a claim about beer, and it's a perfect example of how reasoning breaks. The video on YouTube is called 8 Beer Brands Americans Should Avoid and 4 Cleaner Picks. The title sounds convincing, and that's what makes it dangerous. Not for beer drinkers, for how we think. It's a case study of how reasoning breaks, not a debate about beer quality. It's about how people reason incorrectly when something sounds scientific and authoritative. Specifically, it shows how intelligent-sounding arguments are built on misframing, selective evidence, and stacked assumptions. So pattern 1, the detection of something does not equal risk. So the video opens with the first beer, Michelob Ultra. And it says, quote, in February of 2019, the Public Interest Research Group released the report. Laboratory testing detected glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup weed killer, in Michelob Ultra at levels of 0.5 parts per billion. Several elements are true here. Glyphosate can be detected in food and beverages. Laboratory methods are capable of measuring it at low levels, including parts per billion. A measurement like this answers one question. Is it detectable? It doesn't answer whether that level is high or low and how it compares to other beers and foods. Detection's about the presence, not the health impact. I know there's no such thing as good food or beer with glyphosate. The point is we're doing a beer comparison here to other beers. And to interpret that number, you would need to know how it compares to other foods, such as cereal, water you drink, and other beverages. You need a reference point for what's considered harmful, and you would need to understand the exposure also. How much does a person need to drink and consume? Without that, the number doesn't have a clear meaning. The same report the video cites as a reference to make the claim. It adds important context to this. It says, quote, we consider the amounts of glyphosate in beer and wine to be relatively low compared to amounts found in items like cereal. The study also says, quote, our results also showed that 3 out of 4 organic beer and wines contain glyphosate. So that changes the interpretation the video suggests from this is unusual and concerning to it's common and present at low levels. Again, not that I'm okay with glyphosate being used. This is the issue is they're using it to defend and criticize one product. Also, there's a technical issue. And I only know this because I'm an engineer and I do testing, and who would have thought? The testing method used was adapted from another matrix used to test for glyphosate, milk. So glyphosate is known to be matrix sensitive. Like most things you do this type of analysis for, it can be affected or suppressed by other ingredients. So without a matrix-specific validation control calibration curve, small measurements can be amplified, suppressed, or misinterpreted. It can go both ways. Now, this doesn't make the results wrong. It just makes the interpretation more uncertain. In practice, analytical methods can appear to be precise, but they can be distorted from the sample matrix. So different beverages might amplify or suppress the signals different, meaning the reasoning breaks when the argument shifts from we can detect this to this is a problem. Classic issue, the detection becomes implied risk. From a let's solve the right problem perspective, it's framed as is something concerning present? The real question is, at this level, does it matter? So there's another layer to this that's easy to miss. When good data gets used the wrong way. The video cites this paper from the USPIRG Education Fund titled Glyphosate in Beer and Wine, Test Results and Future Solutions. So the same organization published a follow-up article noting that glyphosate, of course, remains widely used in the U.S. and continues to appear in beverages. And this, again, is reasonable. The organization's mission is to conduct research and public education around issues affecting health and safety and to raise awareness about pesticide use. That's its goal. Something changes when that information with good intentions is taken out of its original context. The report includes important nuances. The fact that the glyphosate levels in beer are relatively low compared to other foods and organic products can contain it, those details matter for the interpretation. And this moves us away from the real question, how glyphosate exposure should be understood and addressed at a systems level, not towards a narrower and potentially misleading conclusion about specific products in beer. This is not a failure of the original research foundation. It's what happens when data is separated from context, and context is replaced with a narrative, this video, and conclusions are drawn without connecting them. In that sense, the issue isn't just misinformation, it's transformation. This is where credible sources can unintentionally contribute to the confusion when their work is interpreted through a different frame than the one that was used to create it. Good data doesn't mean good conclusions. It depends on how the question is framed. So pattern number 2, back to this video that is comparing good beers and bad beers. It's titled, the link is in the show notes, 8 beer brands Americans should avoid and 4 cleaner picks. Pattern number 2 that causes confusion, misinterpretation, misinformation. A process does not equal the final product. So still in the Michelob Ultra example, the video says, quote, is mass-produced using high-gravity brewing, a cost-cutting method. To fix this, they add propylene glycol alginate, PGA. Now the video is going to explain what this chemical is. PGA is synthesized using propylene oxide, a probable human carcinogen, end quote. So the video's reasoning why this is a bad beer is PGA is used. No, actually, it's not that the PGA is an ingredient. It's they're talking about the ingredients used to make PGA, and that's why this is bad, not because the PGA is bad. The video goes to explain PGA is made with propylene oxide. Propylene oxide is hazardous, therefore this beer is concerning. So this evaluates how something is made, not what's actually present in the final product. 2 different questions are being collapsed. One is the process hazard, whether something hazardous was used during manufacturing, and the other is the final product risk, whether that substance is still present in the final product, and if so, at what level that matters. These are not the same questions. Ironically, for example, to give you an example of a safe product made using hazardous ingredients, who would have thought? 0 VOC paint. Now, if you look at the label on a can of 0 VOC paint, you will either think it's bad for the environment or bad for the air you breathe, when in fact, you have to put chemicals in the formulation if, when it dries, you don't want it to off-gas. Pharmaceuticals sometimes do the same thing. There may be toxic ingredients that are transformed during the processing. It's kind of like cooking. Things transform. You bake a cake, it's not what the initial ingredients were necessarily. Food processing routinely. Inputs are different from the outputs. The presence of a hazardous input doesn't mean a hazardous output. The video never asks what remains in the final product. It never considers whether it persists, is present, degrades, decomposes, or is removed. Instead, argument shifts from what's in the beer to how an ingredient is made. The logic of the video is, if it's involved at some point, it matters now. The real question being skipped is, again, whether that propylene oxide is present at all. Stable in the beer breaks down. Without those answers, the conclusion's incomplete. Pattern number 3. A hazard does not equal a risk. In the Stella section next, it's choosing Stella as the next beer to criticize, and the title again of this video, 8 beer brands Americans should avoid. So the next one up here they're picking on is Stella. And it says, quote, relies on caramel coloring, often class 3 or class 4 carcinogen, produced by heating carbohydrates with ammonia and sulfates, produces 4-methyl-midazoles, possibly carcinogenic. So the structure is straightforward. The beer uses caramel color. The fact is, some caramel colors, there's 4 different types, can produce that 4-MEI chemical, which is possibly carcinogenic and therefore problematic. The critical issue is there are 4 classes of caramel color, and only certain types, classes 3 and 4, are associated with the 4-MEA possibly carcinogenic compound. The video never establishes which type is used. In fact, the video uses the word often class 3 or class 4, yet it implicitly assumes that the one associated with risk is what's in that beer, that Pacific beer, mind you. So this follows a familiar reasoning path. See it on the label, there's a concern, do some research, worst case association, conclusion. And the analysis began with the ingredient, not the outcome. Possibly carcinogenic answers whether a substance can cause harm under certain conditions. It doesn't answer whether it's present and at levels that matter. And even if it was present, caramel color is used in small amounts and the exposure may be minimal. The argument moves from possibility to assumed present to assumed risk without doing the work in between. They didn't test their claim. They tested the ingredient, and they didn't just skip the dose. They skipped identifying which ones. Pattern number 4, language replaces analysis. Next is discussing Coors Light. The video says, quote, using corn syrup instead of malted barley confirms that the foundational ingredient is not grain from a pristine field, rather glucose syrup from industrial GMO corn. Sounds scary. It suggests that barley is natural and real, while corn syrup is industrial and artificial. Did you catch just how the words frame that? What's being compared is not natural versus unnatural. It's fermentable sugars from barley versus fermentable sugars from corn. They're both agriculture, processed, and serve the same function. Words like industrial and pristine, they persuade you how to think. What's really being compared are differences in flavor, style, body, and cost of beer, and that's a trade-off, not a moral distinction. Pattern 5. The mechanism doesn't equal the meaning. So next is the clear bottle, a beer that comes in a clear bottle, Corona. The video describes the formation of 3-BT and links it to skunk spray. Quote, selling beer in clear glass is negligent because it allows UV radiation to penetrate the liquid and degrade the hop compounds instantly. The 3-MBT is known as the skunk thiol. It's the same exact chemical compound found in a skunk's anal glands. This is real chemistry they described. Beer can become skunky through the photochemical reaction. That's fact. When light, UV, or blue light hits the beer, riboflavin acts as a photosynthesizer and the reaction produces 3-BT. It's a compound that's potent and detectable at low levels. That's why packaging matters. Brown bottles block most light, green bottles block less light, and clear bottles block almost none. Cans, which beer manufacturers like, they block it entirely. This is why beer is packaged in colored bottles or cans. The mechanism's correct. Where the reasoning breaks is what the mechanism is taken to mean. The statement that 3-MBT is the exact same compound found in a skunk's anal gland is technically true, but it's rhetorically loaded. It suggests danger. What it actually represents is the same molecule, but not the same risk. It's category error. The video moves from a, quote, chemical reaction occurs to, therefore, something harmful is happening. Skunking's not a health hazard, actually. It's a flavor and aroma issue. It smells bad. It affects taste. It doesn't affect health at typical exposure levels. So calling the clear bottle packaging negligent or harmful is not scientific. It's a framing choice. The same pattern appears in the video's claim of it's been a chemical cover-up here, because the video suggests that the same brewer then uses a modified hop to hide the problem. In practice, some brewers use light, stable hop extracts to prevent the skunking and to maintain flavor, especially in clear bottles. And that's not concealment, it's a formula. The real question is not does this packaging create a harmful chemical? It's, does the packaging affect flavor, stability under what conditions? Pattern number 6. A design does not equal a defect. Next up is Bud Light. Quote, they imply a chemical trick. Amylglucosase, an industrial enzyme, is added to aggressively break down complex sugars into simple sugars. The yeast consumes nearly everything, leaving behind a liquid with zero nutritional value. You are essentially drinking fermented rice water that has been enzymatically stripped of its character, end quote. These are real facts. Rice is used in beers like Bud Light. Using rice actually contributes to a lighter body and cleaner flavor. That chemical is a real enzyme. It breaks complex starches into fermentable sugars, and yeast consumes those sugars, resulting in fewer residual sugars and lower calorie content. The outcome is a beer that is lighter in body, lower in calories, and less sweet. It's not a flaw, it's a design. The goal, the way the video presents it, is being ignored. The design is being interpreted as a defect by those presenting the video. The video reframes a standard brewing technique as manipulation, calling it a, quote, chemical trick. Enzymes are not foreign to food production and beer. They're catalysts used in bread making, brewing, and even in your own body's digestive system. The phrase fermented rice water, technically true. Very selectively reductive. Many foods can be described that way. Say beer is fermented grain liquid, wine is fermented grape juice, yogurt is fermented milk. The description's not incorrect. The video is constructing it to diminish. The same applies to zero nutritional value. Let's face it, beer is not consumed as a meaningful source of nutrition. And then they were talking about what you drink after your workout shouldn't be bad for you. It's mostly water, alcohol, and small amounts of residual compounds. The statement made implies that something valuable has been removed. In reality, the product, the beer, is never intended to provide nutrition and recovery. It's a subtle and important shift in criteria. The video is treating rice as inferior because it's cheaper than barley, and assuming the lower cost means lower quality. The fact is, rice is used because brewers use it because it produces a cleaner profile of the flavor and less body, and its undrinkability, and that's a design choice. A light beer is being judged by the standards of a different kind of beer. If you want richness, complexity, then light beer will seem lacking. If the goal is lighter, lower calorie, more neutral product, then those same characteristics are features, not flaws. So the video's reframing a design choice as a defect. And once you accept that, the conclusions feels inevitable. Pattern number 7 is the presence does not equal exposure. Still in the Bud Light packaging section here, the video says, quote, these cans are lined with an epoxy resin containing bisphenol A. When you drink a 6-pack, you're exposing your hormonal system to a chemical linked to reproductive issues and metabolic disorders, end quote. So this is a strong example how real elements can be arranged to imply risk without establishing the risk. Several parts of this claim are grounded in reality. First of all, aluminum cans are lined to prevent corrosion and preserve flavor. PBA has been used in epoxy linings historically and studied for exposure levels, and it's been removed from baby bottles as a precautionary regulatory decision. But the argument skips an important step, which is exposure. The presence of BPA does not automatically mean it enters the beverage at a meaningful level, gets into what you drink. For that to matter, you would need to know whether it migrates from the lining into the liquid, under what conditions, maybe storage, temperature, age, and at what concentration, and compare that to safety thresholds. Instead, the reasoning, it collapses those 3 questions into one. It moves directly from it's in the package to it affects the body. And this is where it loses its footing. Toxicology for this ingredient depends on dose, not existence. It's also missing context because manufacturers have shifted to PBA-free or PBA-reduced linings, which means the blanket statement that beer cans contain PBA can be outdated, brand-specific, or incomplete. And phrases like linked to reproductive issues, grounded, but again, it's the context. What's happening underneath is familiar: compression. You take the hazard and the outcome are treated as a single step. And the real question is not whether it contains the compound, it's does it reach you when you drink that at a meaningful level? Pattern number 8. This is Heineken. They're going to use in this example. Pattern 8 is a single cause does not relate to a complex outcome. A single variable can't be reduced to something that's actually a more complex outcome with more variables. So the Heineken part of the video says, Heineken gives people a splitting headache. This is a quote. It's not dehydration, it's neurotoxicity. The culprit, acetaldehyde, end quote. So this is a mix of truth, but overreach. And by the way, German lagering versus industrial brewing is a romantic versus industrial narrative framing. It's not a clean scientific framing. Acetaldehyde is real. In fact, it's ironically, well, first of all, it is a normal intermediate compound in fermenting, and at high levels it can affect flavor, yes. But ironically, in the human body, acetaldehyde is produced when your body metabolizes alcohol, and that contributes to hangovers symptoms. So the reasoning breaks when the video moves from identifying a real molecule to assigning it as the primary cause of the outcome, because we all know that other factors are part of getting a hangover. It's not just dehydration. That's a replacement for hangovers being driven by multiple factors. And replacing that with a single cause oversimplifies what's happening. The first assumption. The claim implies that Heineken's process, the speed, because it's faster, putting stuff out faster, is not taking its time, that the speed equals the residual toxin, the acetaldehyde. It says there's more acetaldehyde because of how the beer is made. That rests on an assumption. First of all, is the Heineken brewing process that much faster and in a meaningful way that actually increases the acetaldehyde? How much faster? How's it measured? Nothing, no comparisons provided in the video. The assumption is any difference is accidental, meaning Heineken can't prevent it. They have no control over it. If they want to put it out faster, this is just how it is. They can't control it. What if that's not true? What if the brewer made a deliberate trade-off? Brewers do it all the time. We can do trade-offs for flavor, consistency, shelf life, cost. It's all part of the design space. And it's plausible that that specific flavor profile was targeted. The manufacturer may understand the effect, and the residual level might have been evaluated actually relative to the contribution from your body metabolizing alcohol. In other words, it's being framed as a flaw, but it's a design choice that doesn't make it harmless, but it changes the question. The next assumption. The presence of that compound means there's a meaningful difference in effect on your body. Even if Heineken contained more acetaldehyde, the question is, does it matter? Because the dominant source of acetaldehyde is the body. It's produced during the metabolism of alcohol after you consume it. So even if a beer contained 0, the body would still generate. This is an example, and we talk about how we think of plausible mechanism being used in place of demonstrated magnitude, the numbers, how big. The relative question should not be, is acetaldehyde present in the beer? The real question is, how much is in the beer, and does it matter relative to what your body produces? Next assumption, still in the Heineken case, is an experience does not mean you know what caused it. So The claim assumes people feel worse after drinking Heineken. Do they? Is this measured or remembered? Is there a control group that drinks Heineken and reports no difference? Even if some people feel worse, we haven't isolated how many drinks they had, how much sleep, water, dehydration, food. So when multiple variables are moved or affected, then it becomes guesswork. What would it take to show this is true? To support the original claim, we would need to show, number one, measured levels of acetaldehyde in Heineken, how much actually remains in the finished beer, not just it smells like it. Number two, comparison to other beers, hasn't been done in the video. Number three, the magnitude of the difference between the other beers and the Heineken. Number four, the amount produced by the body from metabolizing the same alcohol. 5, the evidence that the difference is meaningful and relative to the outcomes, meaning the headaches. And lastly, controlled data linking the difference to the severity of the hangovers reported versus control groups who drank beer without acetaldehyde. And without that, it's a plausible mechanism standing in for causation. We also have a measurement problem here. What is a hangover? The outcome is poorly defined. Is it a headache, nausea, your impaired cognitive impairment, fatigue, or it's just I feel worse? So that's kind of subjective. Without metrics to define that, the outcome itself is kind of unstable and not easy to do an experiment with. The pattern here is we're going to identify something real, and we're going to assign the cause. We're going to ignore measuring how much, ignore the variables, and generalize. And the result is a clean story, but it's not a complete model. My final thoughts on this pattern 8, if everything in the claim were true, the key question remains, how much and does it matter? And without that, any explanation is insufficient. This is not about beer. It's what happens when a plausible cause replaces something measured, actually measured, a system. And once you see this pattern, it shows up everywhere. Solve the right problem. Pattern 9. Now the standard changes. Here the video shifts to recommending beer. First beer it recommends is Fat Tire from New Belgium, and something important changes. Earlier in the video, it was nonstop criticizing beers such as Michelob Ultra, Stella, Coors Light, Bud Light, and Heineken. And they were evaluated using chemistry, even if it was a bad evaluation, contamination, toxicology, and implied exposure. And the critique was grounded, at least in appearance, in scientific reasoning about ingredients and risk. But when it came time to recommend a beer, the criteria used in the video shifts to, quote, New Belgium is a certified B Corporation, carbon neutral, operates wastewater treatment, rejects GMO corn and rice fillers. You are voting for a supply chain that fights for climate change, end quote. And you wait, and there's nothing about chemistry, toxicology, exposure. The video moves from evaluating products by composition to evaluating a company's behavior. And they might be valid claims about the company's behavior, but they answer a different question. They speak to environmental practices and corporate values. There is no comparison to the ingredients, exposure, and health effects between the recommended beers and those being criticized. Instead, it shifts from this is chemically concerning to this company behaves responsibly. So the assumption is that a more environmentally responsible company produces a healthier product. That relationship has not been established, at least in the video. A company can operate responsibly, of course, in one domain without producing a meaningful different product composition. The reason this works is psychological. Terms like B Corp, carbon neutral, sustainability. It creates a halo effect that substitutes for a deeper analysis. So a fair comparison would be to evaluate those same variables, and you would expect to see differences in pesticide levels, additives, processing methods, and measurable exposures if we're comparing apples to apples, and none of that is presented. The first 8 beers are evaluated using scientific language. The recommended beer is evaluated using ethical and environmental language. The problems framed as which beers are harmful. The recommendation answers which company aligns with preferred values, not the same question. Pattern number 10. The claim does not mean it's a verified fact. So, in the Pabst Blue Ribbon example, the video claims EDTA is present. They didn't verify it. There is no evidence that EDTA is in PBR beer. That claim appears to be possibly based on confusion from Googling and searching the source. EDTA, calcium disodium EDTA, is not a typical or standard ingredient in beer. So this should pose the question, what is that? Why is it here? It is used in some foods, like canned products, to control oxidation. It's a different category of product. So if it's not there, the argument collapses entirely, of course. And even if it were present, the reasoning relies on some association. Chemical name's not an argument. There is a plausible explanation, though, for how this error may have occurred. If you search for, quote, PBR EDTA, one of the most common results is not for the beer, it's for a laboratory buffer solution, often referred to as, quote, 1X PBS with EDTA. In context, PBR can appear as shorthand or naming overlap in lab materials, and the formation typically includes deionized water, sodium chloride, EDTA. This has nothing to do with Pabst Blue Ribbon. If someone is scanning quickly or assembling an argument from fragmented sources, it'd be easy to misinterpret this as referring to the beer rather to the laboratory buffer. And once a connection is made, even incorrectly, the rest of the narrative can be built around it. This is a different kind of failure. It's not just an unverified claim, it's source confusion. The name matches. Once the wrong source is accepted, everything's built on top of it. It can sound detailed, technical, convincing, and still be incorrect. So before asking whether an ingredient is harmful, establish that it is in fact there. Pattern 11, our last example, is this video's like conclusion first, present evidence second. That's pattern. It presents a conclusion first and then assembles evidence to support it. And when a question is fixed, the evidence becomes selective. None of the arguments rely on false interpretation. They rely on facts arranged in a misleading way. This is why they're persuasive. The pattern isn't only flawed reasoning, it's directional reasoning. The question shifts from what's true to what supports the story. Now for a missing variable, you guessed it, alcohol. One thing largely absent from the video and discussions like this is alcohol itself. Ethanol is the dominant variable. Compared to trace amounts of compounds like acetaldehyde in Heineken or in a beer, alcohol is the primary exposure and the primary driver of the psychological effect. And if the goal is to understand health impact, it's the first variable to consider. So naming matters. We usually don't call it ethanol. We call it alcohol. The framing matters because now it makes a substance feel familiar, social, and different from other chemicals. Chemically, it is ethanol. It's the same class compound as other alcohols, such as isopropyl alcohols, differing in structure and toxicity, but not in the category. You'll often hear, a glass of red wine a day is good for you. Even if a beverage contains compounds with potential benefits, that doesn't remove the trade-off. The relevant question is the benefit tied to alcohol or to something else contained in the drink? And if it's something else, alcohol is not the only way to get it. None of this makes the decision for you, but it makes the structure of the decision visible. You have a primary variable, ethanol, secondary compounds we've been talking about, and a combined outcome. This is not about beer and alcohol. Patterns are the same. It's about what happens when a good story replaces a good model. And once you see that pattern, it shows up everywhere. Thanks for listening. Till next time, I'm Daniel Stee.